You know, we are so accustomed to seeing athletes like actually finish their narrative arcs.
Yeah, exactly.
They rise, they hit their peak, and then they eventually fade out into retirement. So a story that stops abruptly right at the summit, leaving this massive void, it really challenges everything we expect from a sports legend.
And that void is basically the focal point of today's deep dive. We are looking at a retrospective text that chronicles, well, the turbulent life, the tragic brevity, and the staggering posthumous legacy of Duramente.
It's quite a story.
It really is. So the mission today is to figure out how raw, chaotic potential outlives tragedy. We want to explore how a fundamentally flawed protagonist reshaped thoroughbred racing.
Completely from the ground up.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to grasp the sheer shock of his legacy, we really have to start with the impossible expectations placed on him the second he was born in 2012.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, he possessed what they considered an elite, totally flawless blueprint.
Right, because in the thoroughbred world, pedigree is destiny.
Yeah.
His sire was King Kamehameha, who was a Japanese Derby winner and like a massive breed-shaping stallion.
A huge deal.
Oh, completely.
Yeah.
And his dam was Admire Groove. She was a Grade 1 winner herself, and she was the daughter of the legendary mare Air Groove. So genetically speaking, you are looking at the equivalent of sports royalty.
But a lineage like that carries some heavy baggage, doesn't it?
It really does.
The assumption is always that a horse bred from such refined, aristocratic lines will be, composed and professional.
Right, the perfect gentleman.
Exactly. But whoever named this horse must have had a crystal ball. They named him Duramente, which is an Italian musical term meaning forcefully, intensely, violently.
Wow.
And he lived up to that instantly. He was a complete menace.
What's fascinating here is the severe friction between his royal genetics and his actual temperament.
Yeah.
He fiercely rejected being the perfect, composed athlete. The source material highlights that he possessed this immense power, but he just lacked the psychological maturity to wield it.
Reading about those early days, honestly, the only analogy that makes sense is a teenage prodigy who's just been handed the keys to a Formula One car.
Oh, that is perfectly put.
Right. You're looking at terrifying horsepower, but absolutely zero steering, no brakes, and no discipline.
And his debut race illustrates that perfectly. He finished second largely because of a terribly slow start.
Just left behind.
Yeah, he had the engine, but the internal mechanics of a race, like braking from the gate, settling into a rhythm, those were completely lost on him.
Then in his second start, he wins, but he throws a massive fit at the starting gate.
A total tantrum.
Yes. It was so disruptive that the racing officials actually forced him to undergo a mandatory re-examination before he was even allowed to compete again.
That is wild for a horse of his caliber.
I know, right? And even when he ran the Kyoto News High and finished second to his rival Real Steel, it wasn't a lack of speed that beat him. It was a total lack of focus.
Right.
He was violently intense, but really struggling to get out of his own way.
That dynamic creates such a compelling tension, Having a biological engine running constantly in the red means the chassis is always at risk.
Always.
But before the chassis breaks, we finally get to see what happens when that raw torque connects with the track. Which brings the narrative to the Satsuki show.
Oh, man. This is where the story shifts from, chaotic potential to undeniable greatness.
Absolutely.
So going into the Satsuki show, which is the first leg of the Japanese Triple Crown, he wasn't actually the favorite.
No, he was sitting behind his stablemate Satano Crown and, of course, Real Steel.
Right. And during the race, disaster almost struck. Coming around the fourth corner, Duramente drifted massively outward, like he lost a vast amount of ground.
Yeah, and when a thoroughbred takes a corner that wide, they are fighting intense centrifugal force.
Right.
They are bleeding momentum while the horses on the rail are just accelerating in a straight line.
Wait, hold on. If drifting at the corner usually spells the absolute end of a race, exactly how much raw, abnormal speed does an animal need to not just recover from that, but completely humiliate the competition?
That is the big question.
I mean, I know that track at Nakayama. The home stretch is famously tiny.
Very short.
Mathematically, it shouldn't just be hard to recover from a wide drift there. It should be literally impossible.
Huh.
Was the rest of the field just weak that year, or did he somehow break the physics of the sport?
Well, the field was exceptionally strong, which makes the recovery an absolute anomaly of biomechanics. To overcome that lost ground on such a short stretch, a horse has to tap into an abnormal stride length. They have to generate a level of torque that completely defies standard equine physics.
Unbelievable.
The propulsion required to pass the entire field from that wide angle, it is something you might see once in a decade.
The commentator calling the race actually shouted on the live broadcast, "Is he really this strong?"
I love that quote.
Because it wasn't just a win, right? It was an act of physical humiliation against top-tier competitors.
It really was. But that chaotic victory at the Satsuki show, it proved his sheer power, sure, but it didn't prove he was a complete racehorse.
Right, he was still messy.
Exactly. The real test of mastery came next, at the Japanese Derby.
Because the Derby is a completely different beast.
Oh, entirely.
We're talking about Tokyo Racecourse, 2,400 meters. It requires deep stamina and real tactical execution.
Yes.
And here, he doesn't drift, he doesn't throw a tantrum at the gate, he runs a flawless race.
Perfectly executed.
He launches this devastating late run from mid-pack, straight down the outside. He secures the 2 crowns and even sets a race record in the process.
The duality of those 2 races is it cemented him as the undisputed king of his generation.
Yeah.
The Satsuki show demonstrated his frightening, untamed power, but the Derby demonstrated that he could actually steer that Formula One car when it mattered most.
So it is the highest possible peak. I mean, the public is whispering about sweeping the Triple Crown.
Naturally.
And there are serious plans in the works to send him to France for the Prix de l'Arc de Triomphe.
Which is huge.
Huge. If you are listening to this and wondering why the Arc matters so much, it is basically the ultimate white whale for Japanese racing.
It really is.
It's a grueling, prestigious European turf race that Japan has spent decades trying and failing to win. Sending Duramente felt like sending the chosen one.
The ceiling felt totally limitless. But, the fundamental tragedy of thoroughbred racing is the immense fragility of the athletes. We are talking about 500-kilogram animals balancing explosive speed on incredibly delicate ankles.
And he wasn't even running a grueling workout when it happened. He was just resting at the farm. And he suffered fractures in both front legs.
Both of them. Just devastating.
The Triple Crown dream vanished instantly.
Yeah.
The Arc de Triomphe challenge evaporated.
And biomechanically, recovering from double leg fractures is a monumental task. The weight distribution issues alone usually force a horse into immediate retirement.
Yet he goes through this massive rehabilitation, and he actually comes back to the track at age 4.
A miracle in itself.
Totally. And he wins the Nakayama Kinnin right out of the gate.
The talent clearly remained, but the universe seemed to constantly push back on him.
Yeah, bad luck just followed him.
They traveled to the Dubai Shima Classic, which is a premier international race, and right before the gates open, he loses a shoe.
Oh, you have got to be kidding.
Running at that level with an unbalanced foot is a severe handicap, yet he fought through it anyway to finish second.
Which brings him back to Japan for the Takarazuka Kinnin. And the source material paints a really grim picture of this particular race.
Oh, the conditions were awful.
Brutal. Heavy rain, deep, tiring ground. He struggled in the slog and finished second to a mare named Mariolite. But the placement didn't even matter.
No, it didn't.
Because after he crossed the finish line on that torn-up surface, he lost his balance.
And that misstep resulted in a catastrophic career-ending injury. The racing journey just stopped right there.
Only 9 races.
Unbelievable.
But here's where it gets really interesting, though. The retrospective dives into a massive what-if regarding another legendary horse, Kita-san Black.
Oh, yes.
A rivalry with Kita-san Black would have been the legendary Season 2 that fans never got to see.
And the timing of their respective careers is one of the most frustrating missed connections in modern racing history.
Because they just missed each other.
Exactly. Kita-san Black was a late boomer. When Duramente was tearing up the track and setting Derby records, Kita-san Black was still figuring out his mechanics.
They were just on entirely different developmental timelines.
Right. And by the time Kita-san Black evolved into this iron-willed, front-running machine who dominated Japanese racing for years, Duramente was already standing in a breeding shed.
Which is such a shame.
It is. And this raises an important question about how we define a sporting legacy.
Yeah.
Do we value the sustained, durable dominance of a horse like Kita-san Black, who showed up year after year? Or do we value the sheer dizzying height of an impossibly high peak, even if the body couldn't sustain it beyond 9 races?
It is the ultimate sports debate, really.
Yeah.
Longevity versus peak.
Exactly.
But for Duramente, the career-ending injury didn't actually conclude the story. The narrative pivots from a tragic physical breakdown to something almost like mythological.
A rebirth, essentially.
Yeah, the unfinished king built this posthumous empire that completely overshadowed his brief time on the track.
He transitioned to a stallion career, which, by the way, is never a guaranteed success, regardless of a horse's racing accolades.
Right. Great runners don't always make great sires.
Exactly. To understand why, you have to look at the genetic bottleneck in Japanese breeding.
Okay.
For decades, the bloodline of Sunday Silence completely saturated the market. Then King Kamehameha came along and added his own massive invariance.
And Duramente carried both of those dominant bloodlines.
Yes.
Meaning, if you bred him to most Japanese mares, you risked severe inbreeding.
Precisely. You amplify recessive traits, you risk producing fragile horses, and you basically paint yourself into a genetic corner.
So finding suitable mares that didn't create too much genetic overlap was a complex puzzle for the breeders.
It was a nightmare. Yet the demand was still overwhelming because breeders desperately wanted access to that Satsuki show acceleration.
They wanted that F1 engine.
They did. They gambled that his sheer vitality would overtower the risks of line breeding.
So he started covering mares, but the tragic brevity of his life struck again. On August 31st, 2021, at just 9 years old, Duramente died suddenly from acute colitis.
So young.
He left behind exactly 725 foals spread across just 5 crops.
And that is when his DNA just exploded onto the scene.
It was immediate, wasn't it?
Literally 2 months after his death, a son named Title Holder won the Kika Show, which is a grueling 3,000-meter stamina test. It was Duramente's first Grade 1 victory as a sire.
And the timeline of his offspring after that is just relentless.
Yeah.
In 2022, Title Holder dominated the Tenno Spring and the Takarazuka Kinnan.
Just unstoppable.
Meanwhile, a filly named Stars on Earth captured the fillies' Double Crown. And then the next year, Liberty Island crushed her rivals to win the fillies' Triple Crown. Dressa took the Kikashift. Champagne Color won the NHK Mile Cup.
What stands out here is not just the sheer volume of wins, but the extreme versatility.
Right, because they're winning at different lengths.
Exactly. Versatility across all distances and surfaces is the holy grail for a stallion. You had offspring winning marathons, offspring winning mile-long sprints.
And even horses like Via de la Luna capturing a Grade 1 title on dirt, which is completely different from turf.
Exactly. He became the leading sire of Japan in 2023, a monumental achievement that, tragically, he wasn't alive to witness.
By 2025, every single one of his 5 generations had produced a Grade 1 winner.
The profound insight here lies in how his most prominent flaw translated into his greatest genetic asset.
His temper.
Yes. The violent intensity and chaotic energy that made him so difficult to steer on the track became the exact genetic vitality needed to shatter the stagnation of the Japanese breeding pool.
That is wild.
He passed down the fire, but his offspring somehow managed to contain it.
He answered the lingering what if of his own truncated career through the staggering adaptability of his children.
He really did.
He lived up to a name that meant forcefully and intensely, experiencing the absolute highest highs and the most devastating physical lows.
Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe for more.